Hi, my name is Jacob and welcome to another episode of Uncut on the Abrasive Conversations platform. Before I jump into today's episode, I would like to thank you for the continued support. I truly appreciate it. So today's episode is co-produced by Danielle Hofmeister, and what we would like to talk to you about today is the current tensions that we are seeing between Rwanda and South Africa. Now there's a developing story, and in this episode I would like to take a look at that specific story. So what's the story about? So recently 13 South African National Defence Force soldiers have been killed in the DRC. So on Wednesday, President Ramaphosa explained the following, and I am quoting him directly. The fighting is the result of an escalation by the rebel group M23 and Rwandan Defence Force engaging the armed forces of the DRC and attacking peacekeepers from the SADC Mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now what makes this significant is because for the first time South Africa directly accused Rwanda of backing the M23 forces. Ramaphosa went as far as to say that it was the M23 and the Rwandan Defence Force. That led to the President of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, responding to the press release by President Ramaphosa, and this is what he had to say. What has been said about these conversations in the media by South African officials and President Ramaphosa himself contains a lot of distortion, deliberate attacks, and even lies. He went further to say South Africa is in no position to take on the role of peacemaker or mediator, and if South Africa prefers confrontation, Rwanda will deal with the matter in that context any day. If we look at the tweet of President Paul Kagame, then there is a number of things that he is saying, but he also say this is that if South Africa are looking for trouble, Rwanda are ready for it. So this led to some level of, I would say, panic or interest within the South African media and even landscape commentator. So it's interesting that Rwanda took a direct shot at South Africa. But what does this mean? So there's a number of questions that I would like us to go through to give me more context so that the normal South African citizen understand what currently is going on. So the first question that some of you might ask is, what is South Africa doing in the DRC in the first place? If 13 soldiers have been killed, why are they there and what are they doing? So South Africa has been in the DRC for more than 2 decades at this particular point. And they were there for various peacekeeping missions by the UN, the AU, and now SADC. So it's not new, they have been in it, and I think a lot of you might have known it. But there was reports last year that the UN mission came to an end, and this is where the SADC mission came and tried to stabilize the issue that is currently taking place in the DRC. Now, what you need to know is that the neighboring, where the conflict is taking place, is in the eastern part of the DRC, and it's neighboring a number of countries. There's Uganda, there's Rwanda, there's Burundi, there's Tanzania, and there is Zambia. Now, when the eastern part, if conflict is escalating in the eastern part, then it affects a lot of other countries, because we see the forced migration of people within the eastern part of the DRC into countries such as Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and Zambia. So you see forced migration whenever conflict is taking. And that's another reason for the SADC region, because the DRC falls in the SADC region, and Zambia is also part of the SADC region. So SADC has an interest in the conflict because it affects its security issues. So that's why South Africa is currently in the DRC. Now, another question that people might ask is, why is there a conflict in the eastern part of the DRC? I can in detail in this episode go into why the conflict is there, or I can tell you that you can go and check out my other work. So one of the things that I've done is I wrote a whole doctoral thesis on this particular conflict, explaining why this particular conflict is happening. I've also written a number of articles on this issue, explaining why this conflict is happening. There is radio interviews on YouTube, there is radio interviews on Facebook, there is interviews and material on this everywhere almost. So I would put some of the links in the description for you to go and check it out, to see a much more in-depth conversation with regards to the conflict, why it's happening, who's the role players. But the segment is way too short to go into detail explaining why there's a conflict in the DRC. But I can say this, this is my conclusion when everyone is asking me about the conflict and why this conflict is happening. There's a regional ethnic conflict between Hutu and Tutsi elites, and that conflict is taking place in the eastern part of the DRC, and it's mostly in Kivu, especially North Kivu, and that's the province the closest to Rwanda. In the DRC, there is various militia groups. Some of those militia groups are dating back to the Rwandan genocide, and one of those groups are the FDLR, or the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda. Now, that specific group were responsible for the genocide in Rwanda. So Rwanda therefore have a very pertinent security issue when there is a conflict in it. It's immediate for them and it affects them internally. So this is one of the reasons why we see Rwanda's involvement sometimes in this particular conflict. Now, Rwanda, in various UN reports, investigations, have denied direct contact with the forces in the DRC, but some people have said you don't need direct contact, meaning you don't have to fight them directly, but you're doing it via the M23. Now, this introduced the M23. The M23 is largely a Tutsi militia group, not a rebel group. I believe it's a militia group, and this militia group have strong relations with Rwanda dating back to 1990s. So in the 1990s, Paul Kagame was still in Uganda and was part of the Rwandan Patriotic Front. And that force, the Patriotic Rwandan Patriotic Force, eventually overthrew the Hutu-led state towards the end of the genocide. So Paul Kagame knows this region and the conflict at a very personal level, because at one point he was also a refugee. So during this time of refugees, there was Tutsi elites across the region who supported each other's struggle in different countries. Now, the M23 is that leadership, and people have a very long historical relationship. So I would suggest you go and read my thesis. Really, in my thesis, I go into detail explaining this conflict in much greater detail. But the thing is, there is a security threat for Rwanda in the DRC. So this conflict, whenever it happens and it brews, then you see Rwanda stepping in and say, whoa, 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 we need to secure our borders. We don't want another genocide in Rwanda. Which leads me to another question. And that question is, why is the M23 such a major player in the current politics? Now, the M23 specifically only started in 2012, but if you really traces their leadership and its members and its soldiers, then you would see that it was formed in 1998 as part as part of a resistance against Laurent Kabila's new government. So Laurent Kabila, with the help of Rwanda, overthrew Zaire, formed the Democratic Republic of Congo, and after that revolution was achieved, it said that there was no place for Tutsi leaders within his government, and that led to the formation of RCD. And RCD later evolved or changed into the CNDP, and the CNDP later became the March 23 movement that was formed in 2012, and since 2012 we know them as M23. But I'm trying to get you to understand that the M23 is not was not formed overnight, and it has been there since the politics of the DRC in the eastern part since the 1990s, and they have firm relationships with the Rwandan leadership that is currently controlling the government. So that's who the M23 is. Now, Rwanda is scared of a specific group, and that group is the FDLR. So that specific group, like I mentioned previously, was responsible for the genocide in Rwanda. Now, the M23 is Rwanda's counter against the FDLR. So as old as the M23 is, the FDLR is just as old. So it's these two forces that on a regular basis are really causing the conflict in the region, and then cause this forced migration. So this is what is currently happening. It's part of a much larger conflict. So this brings me to another question, and this brings it back to South Africa. We are there, we're part of a peacekeeping, but for the first time, President Cyril Ramaphosa directly accused Rwanda of supporting the M23. Now, the question that someone posed in the media is this a diplomatic misstep? And it's also something that Daniel picked up and asked me to reiterate. Is this a diplomatic misstep? So before I answer that, I just want to say the following, is that Kagame did not deny that they didn't support the N23. What he said is that there needs to be a clarification. The Rwandan Defence Force is an army, not a militia. Now, if you see how Cyril Ramaphosa's statement was written, then it says the fighting is the result of an escalation by the rebel group M23 and the Rwandan Defence Force. So, it's written unclear, and it makes that sentence make Rwanda a militia or rebel group, and President Kagame said, but we are not a militia group. But in his tweet and his statement, if you look closely, then you would see is that he did not deny involvement in the recent attacks. So now to answer the question, is this a diplomatic misstep? I do not think this is a diplomatic misstep. South Africa has a responsibility towards its citizens. So if we in a conflict, then the president has to stand up for South Africa and say why things are happening. He is accountable to the South African people. So therefore, I don't see it as a diplomatic misstep. It's something that he has to do. He has to be honest in telling that this is currently happening. Now, the question that someone might ask, a follow-up question, is how sure are South Africa with regards to its accusation that Rwanda is supporting M23 and are part of this attack against South African forces in the DRC. Now, me personally, I was in the South African Defence Force. I deployed to where the conflict currently taking place in Goma. And the one thing that I can tell you is that the South African intelligence is up to a next level. They really gather good intelligence. So before we were deployed to the Congo, there was various security briefings. And these security briefings already tell you what to expect, who the force is and what on the ground. So South Africa being there for more than 2 decades, one of the longest forces or deployments in that particular region, have enough information to know, and intelligence information, that Rwanda is part of this particular conflict and that they support the M23. So that's why President Ramaphosa could, with very certainty, say, look, it's the M23 and the Rwandan Defence Force that was responsible for this particular attack. So I think South Africa has the intelligence to show the world that Rwanda is really involved in it. But because South Africans were killed and there was pressure at the home front, President Ramaphosa had to come clear on it. So I don't think it's a diplomatic misstep. I've been struggling with that word, but I will practice. So it's diplomacy, diplomatic. So it's not a diplomatic misstep. Right, so there's 4 more questions left. So it's not long, it's very short questions I would like to answer. And that is the next question, and is what's the likelihood that there is tension between South Africa and Rwanda would spill over into the region and would become a regional conflict? So both South Africa and Rwanda, they cannot afford any conflict, direct, indirectly, with each other. Both of them are growing economies, and both of them are kind of the examples on the African continent. If they go head to head with one another or indirectly within that specific region, then both of their economies and their people are going to suffer. So as leaders on the African continent, they cannot afford open or any level of conflict with one another. It will be a crisis for both of them. So they can't afford it. And I think both of them are realizing it, that we cannot do it. However, there is tensions or at the diplomatic front now, because Paul Kagame indirectly threatened South Africa. He said, if you want to take it there, then we can take it further. So we are ready if you are ready. But the smart thing for President Cyril Ramaphosa to do is not to engage Rwanda and the Rwandan president anymore. This is a bluff, and he had to appear tough in this particular matter. It's international politics after all, and what we currently see in international politics is the strongman syndrome. Everyone wants to be a dictator. Everyone wants to be a strongman, from Donald Trump to Putin to Netanyahu. Everyone wants to be the top dog. President Ramaphosa, please, we don't need this. Let them go on that side. Your responsibility is South Africa. Your responsibility is Africa. Your responsibility is SADC. You don't need to engage Rwanda in a conflict. It will just weaken us. And we have so many enemies, and because we are openly supporting Palestine, it will give other countries an opportunity to side with Rwanda and drag us into a type of conflict that we are not ready for and we don't want. Which brings me to the third last question is, what are we to gain if we stay in this particular region? Isn't it time for us to get out? Now, one of the important things is when you engage in a conflict or are involved in a conflict like that in the eastern part of the DRC, is that there is so much intelligence and information that passes through. So conflicts like that in the DRC is a hotbed for terrorism. So when there's a hotbed for terrorism, there's also a lot of information that passes through. Now, we need that information for our national security. We can pass that information on to other states, other actors, to keep them safe. But it's always important to have the information firsthand. So for that reason, I believe that South Africa has to be there. South Africa has to be in the DRC to get this information on intelligence firsthand. But then also in terms of a leader on the African continent, we kind of have a responsibility towards not just South Africa and SADC, but also to the rest of Africa, to try and find a way to resolve this particular conflict, because this conflict in the DRC is one of many conflicts on the African continent. The more Africans are fighting each other, the more we are robbed of our resources and our livelihoods, and we will never fully step in to becoming a superpower or a bloc as we potentially could. So being there, trying to resolve a conflict is in the interest of our national interests in South Africa. Which brings me to the second last question that I have, and that question is, should we remain? I don't think so. We must stay there, because if we pull out now out of the conflict, what then happens is that we look weaker, and we don't have the upper hand then in this diplomatic role that is currently taking place. So the best thing for South Africa is to stay, is to deploy more forces, equip our troops really well, and a second thing that they have to start doing is to renew our forces, get rid of Angie Motshekga as the National Defence Force Minister, get someone who really understands what it means in that specific position, and renew the South African defense capabilities in terms of technology. We need to invest in drones. We need to invest in a lot of other things. So that's the second thing that we need to do. We need to be more prepared for conflicts like this. And that would need more money, and that comes from our pockets as South Africans. So we're willing to be better prepared in the event of any escalation between the current rift. And I said it's always a good thing to be prepared. Which brings me to the final question: are we safe? And what is the solution? So let me answer the question. Yes, we are safe. There's no reason to panic. I don't think that this conflict would go much bigger than it currently is. And what is the solution then? The solution is that these two countries, South Africa and Rwanda, has to get to the table, find a diplomatic solution, but not just a diplomatic solution for their tensions between them as countries, but a solution for the conflict in the DRC. And then once they have that and they stabilize that conflict and people can negotiate a way out of that particular conflict, we have to look at other conflicts on the African continent and stop that. We need to stop all of the conflicts on the African continent in the next 10 years, or what is going to happen is you will just see mass migration of well-trained people, as we currently see, or not just in South Africa, but across the continent. There's a big brain drain. So, because people want to go live in countries that is much safer, so you see the doctors going, then you see their children is going. So you see this massive exodus of skilled labor out of Africa because of the unrest in these various countries. So that's just my take on this particular developing story. But let's look at this and stay tuned to this developing story. And if you have any takes on it, please share it in the comment section. I will have a look at it and I will respond in future episodes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. I appreciate it, and until we see each other next time, thank you. Bye-bye.